autistic burnout and depression and just sort of where there's maybe an intersection.
This was one of the first Venn diagrams I ever made was autistic burnout or depression. Because once I learned about burnout, I was like, oh, well, I've had many episodes of depression. And I could go back and say all of those were following an autistic burnout and following a really intense time in my life. So again, it's not going to be an either or, but it can be an and. It could be autistic burnout and depression. And it's important to know it when it's both, because when it's both, they both need support, but the support can be slightly different. So first, let's talk about like how to know if it's just burnout or if you're also depressed. So some of the things that would signal that maybe this is also depression would be things like, think about your relationship to pleasure. So there's a word, anhedonia, basically it means loss of pleasure. So when you're depressed, one of the things that happens is it's kind of like the world goes from being a color movie to a grayscale movie. And it's so difficult to access pleasure. So things that used to bring you joy or delight no longer do. So when you have the energy to access your special interest, does that still give you pleasure? Does it not? For me, when I've been in burnout, sometimes I have a hard time energetically accessing it. But if I'm not also depressed, it will still give me joy and delight. When I've been depressed, no, nothing. Nothing brings me joy or delight. Similarly, kind of how we relate to self and I guess existence, in the sense that when we're depressed, everything is terrible. When we look at our past self, well, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. So it can be common for autistic people to have a lot of negative views about self because of ableism, because of negative past experiences. When I'm not depressed, I'm able to see those for what those are. I'm like, okay, that's a painful thought. Wow. Okay. But I can unhook from it a little bit, or I can remember times in my life where I didn't feel that way. When I'm depressed and I think back to times I felt good about myself, I'm like, that was a lie. That I was delusional. This is what's real. And so there's this confidence that depressed mind has of your life has always been miserable. You will always be miserable. The future will always be miserable. And that sense of worthlessness will be so hard to unhook from. And so that when I think about my distinctions, that's definitely a huge one, is I can't access hope about myself or existence.